This is 2OF Entertainment.
Welcome to the Lost Dollar Business Club, where we talk about business, and not just business. We talk about what makes businesses go up and what makes businesses go down. If you're interested in businesses, this is where it is. We talk about the global economy. We talk about global politics. We talk about everything and anything business related that affects your life on a global scale as well as a local scale. And don't miss after the show, Lost and Found. And we're back. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Lost Dollar Business Club live. And if you're watching it Saturday morning, then technically not live. We have a great guest today, Guy Standing. And Guy, as you know, has been on the show many times. I want to talk about his book today. And we'll discuss it in more detail and even tell you the name. Just for everybody that was expecting Michael and everybody else have things going on, so they couldn't make it. So Guy, unfortunately, is stuck with me. So before we bring Guy in, we're going to have our sponsor give a 30-second commercial. And then the next hour is all Guy Standing. With the new HBN 3-outlet sensing countdown timer with remote control, you can set your whole house up to look like Christmas 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The timer comes with a 2, 4, 6, and 8-hour countdown function. The outlets can be easily operated by hand or by a remote control with the dusk to dawn on and off switch. And they come with 3, 2, and 1 outlet accessories. We use them here at 2OF Entertainment. All right, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Guy Standing. Guy, how are you?
Well, it's very nice to be talking to you again, especially in this very difficult week geopolitically, and seeing Trump back in the White House. It has enormous implications for the state of the world, state of our mental health, the state of a lot of things, including nature. So it's a momentous week, whether you're a pro or an anti Donald Trump, and you can probably guess which camp I'm in. But I think the subject of this book is actually highly topical, I think, and I gather from your earlier remarks that you have had a chance to go through it. And,
I devoured it. No. I'm going to let you talk about it because my questions are. The problem is I ask things that I just want to know and probably the public doesn't care about. So the book is called, just for everybody knows, The Politics of Time, Gaining Control in the Age of Uncertainty. Here's the guy's book. You can get it wherever Penguins are sold. No, you can get it, of course, on Amazon and everywhere else. And we want to thank the people at Penguin for sending it to us. I wasn't sure if it was the villain from Batman or the actual company, but it was very cool. But no, I thought what was interesting, there's a quote which we'll get to about oligarchs that Aristotle made a million years ago. But what I think is interesting now, it's the oligarchs have now decided that they're going to run the country. If you look at like who was at the inauguration, you've got Zuckerberg, Bezos, and Hitler. Musk. And it's sort of like, okay, so here's like a couple $1 trillion in the room. So now basically you can run the government. You just have to write a check. So I found that interesting. The other thing I found interesting with all of Trump's rhetoric about China, we're going to do 100% tariffs, and this one we're going to do tariffs and tariffs and tariffs. Today in the Financial Times, it says, we're not really going to do tariffs with China yet. We're backpedaling, right? So all of a sudden we pounded our chest, scared the world, as you put it, and now I think he's trying to figure out what he can get away with and what he can't. But you're the expert, so you tell me kind of how you see this playing out. But I thought it's just interesting. And like I said, Aristotle said, and he wrote that oligarchs and debt, or debt will kill a country and a nation, and oligarchs are what's going to rule in the future. And that's kind of where we are.
Yeah. I've been writing a series of books, as you know, Stephen,
Right.
And the theme at the background of all the books is that we had a neoliberal economics revolution in the 1980s, led by Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan in terms of political introduction of the policies. And it was led by a group of far-right economists called the Mont Pelerin Society and Frederick Hayek and Milton Friedman and so on. And they advocated a total free market economy. And they wanted to dismantle the institutions, which they, in their way of thinking, was holding back economic growth and so on. And what we've actually had in the last 40, 50 years is a change that means that we have the most unfree market economy ever conceived. I call it rentier capitalism, because more and more of the income and wealth and status and power have been flowing to the owners of property, financial property, intellectual property, and physical property. And the irony of ironies is that this system has gradually transferred the power to the plutocracy, the elite. And what Trump and Elon Musk represent is what I'm calling a plutarchy from ancient Greece, which means rule by the super wealthy in the interests of the super wealthy. Well, that has never actually happened before, not even in the context that you've just talked about, where Aristotle warned of an oligarchy. This is even worse than an oligarchy, because they're controlling information, they're controlling the social media, they're controlling the vernacular, and they're controlling the education industry. Very much this is a major concern. And as it happens, I think the book, The Politics of Time, touches on a very crucial set of issues relating to our crisis. It's a political crisis, it's a social crisis, it's an ecological crisis. And I want to go back to the base of the book and the base of my work over the last 40 years. I worked in the United Nations for a long time, the senior level in the International Labour Organization, and I was always worried about how we conceive work. And if I tell you, as a sort of rhetorical opening question, which I won't give you the answer, but until later, what is the most valuable form of work in the United States, in Great Britain, and in many other countries, according to official statisticians working in government departments? What's the most valuable form of work? And ironically, why is the most valuable form of work given a value of 0 in measures of GDP and economic growth? So all politicians say we must accelerate and increase economic growth. And yet, the most valuable form of work is given a value of 0. That's a puzzle I need to come back to later. Now, every age throughout history has had its stupidity about what is work and what is not work. I believe our current age is the most stupid of all. If you go back to the ancient Greeks, they divided time into 5 varieties, 5 types of activity. The first was labor. Labor was done for exchange value. It was done by the non-citizens. It wasn't a healthy society in the sense it had slaves and it was sexist. We know that. But I'm wanting to talk about the concepts, because the concepts are vital. And the labor was something that the citizen tried to do everything to avoid, because, as Aristotle said, it deforms the mind and the body and makes people incapable of being good citizens. And therefore, that was their rationale for denying them citizenship. And the second form of activity was work. Work was distinguished from labor because it was what you did with your friends, your relations, your community around the home, with focusing on reproductive activities and so on. Alongside these 2 activities, the third one was recreation. Recreation was what you did to keep your body and mind fit for doing work and doing what I'm about to talk about. But the fourth form of activity was what the Greeks called schole or schole, from which we get the term scholarship and school. And schole was a combination of education and public participation in the life of the polis, in the life of the city, in the life of the community. And it was what a good citizen was trying to maximize his use of time in doing. Schole.
Right.
And in addition, there was the two other things, but I said five, but there are six. But the fifth one was what Aristotle called urgia. Now, urgia meant, literally translated, idleness. And what the Greeks recognized is that people need periods of downtime, we would call it, or idleness,
Right.
in order to be thinkers and think through things and be able to make judgments on things. You need to be idle.
Right.
Now, modern times, of course, people who are so-called idle, it's a disparaging term. It's used in a way to condemn people. But the ancients understood you need that. And it went forward in a wonderful statement by Cato, much later than the Greeks. He said, never is a man more active than when he's doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, there's a veritable core of truth that really is important. And the sixth form, which was only beginning to crystallize in the ancient Greeks, but it's there, which under the term eranos, which I interpret it as commoning. Commoning is what you do is just shared activities in the commons, shared things that are focusing on reproduction. And for many, many hundreds of years, the ordinary man and woman wanted to maximize their time in commoning. And all the great rebellions of British history, for example, going through the Battle of Lincoln just before the Magna Carta and the Charter of the Forest came in 1217, through the Peasants' Revolt in 1381, through the Levellers and the Diggers in the 17th century, all the way through the Chartists and so on. It's all been about trying to recover the commons and commoning.
Right.
Today, none of that activity is regarded as work, as productive, as measurable in our national income, and so on. It's disparaged. Right. And yet many of those activities are the most civilizing of all activities. And one of the reasons I believe our crisis, our political crisis today, is because people have lost the ability to spend time in true education, time in deliberative decision-making that they can use against the power of misinformation and disinformation and the fake lies that come through the social media, and that we have all those problems we'll come back to later. But I think the conceptualization of time in this way is a very important way of looking at the challenges we have today. And the book then goes through the changes in our history, our common history, American history, British history, but globally, how the state and capital have reinterpreted time throughout history. And I think that this leads to a new politics of time, because we don't have a politics of time to emancipate people's time. And that, I think, is vital today.
I think part of which is just interesting, you talk about good citizen. So I'm going to deviate a little from the book, just because I want to bring things for today. So good citizens, if you look at like Rockefeller, the Vanderbilts, or the Rothschilds 100, 200 years ago, they were, if you will, they were good citizens because they gave back, whether it was an art collection, a park, or they did things. The oligarchs today don't give back. It's just they want more. And so with them wanting more, and also making it, everything's more expensive, so you have to work harder. It doesn't give people, if you will, have idle time. Unless apparently if you're a millennial, then you do nothing, you lay on a couch all day. But I mean, for the rest of the people, like they don't have that. So a lot of it has really been to make sure that if you're not in this 1%, you're just a worker bee. And what's sad to say is it's not going to get better. And I know Trump wants to make it better, but I don't see that happening. Where he's going to make it, the middle class great. And he's telling Saudi Arabia, lower your oil price and do this and do. But I don't see how that helps, let's say our country, but the rest of the planet, how it brings it back to, if you will, Greek time, where you can do these 6 or 7 things.
Well, I would argue, Stephen, that even if the current generation of plutocrats, right, including Musk and Zuckerberg you've mentioned, and Bezos and everything, even if they were much more generous in being philanthropists, and they do give some of their vast wealth to various causes in which they believe, I'm not going to dispute that, but even if they were more generous, I would still be highly critical of a system that produces such ridiculous, absurd inequalities. I mean, the 9 richest Americans gained $84 billion extra dollars on the one day after the election of Trump in November. 84 billion in one day. Now, this is completely disproportionate to any sensible economic system. I'm sorry, it's just ridiculous. And unless we have a systematic, strategic approach to dismantling the system that produces this absurd outcome, we are not going to defeat the plutocracy, and we're not going to emancipate ourselves into a more sustainable way of living with nature, in a way that gives us security and the capacity to develop ourselves. And we've got to realize that the Democrats in the US and the Labour Party in Britain and the Social Democrats across Europe, they're dead men walking. Yes. They're dead men walking because they have not been able to understand and articulate an alternative progressive politics that involves a dismantling of this system, because that's what's needed. I'm not calling for revolution. I'm calling for an awareness of what it is that we're confronting. I mean, intellectual property rights are absurdly strong today. They give these plutocrats monopoly incomes for 20 years or more, each and every patent they've got. So someone like Zuckerberg has hundreds of patents, which guarantees he's getting a monopoly profit. That's not a free market. That's not a free market. That's the opposite of a free market. It's the same with copyright. Why should these people have copyright for the whole of their lives plus 70 years after they die? This is what the system gives. That's not a free market. That is a system of rent seeking, which gives the owners of the patents and the copyrights and the industrial brands and so on a huge monopolistic price control, where they can jack up prices way above the costs of production and monopolize what is produced and what is not produced and who gets it and who doesn't get it. So we have a system that needs to be fundamentally challenged. And unless I read Bernie Sanders' statement after the defeat, and he's a man who's very frustrated, and he was going on, but he's not realizing that you've got to tackle rentier capitalism. And that, I think, is the real problem that we have in confronting the plutocracy, because at the moment there's not an awareness out there in the mainstream.
Well, that's because people are on Instagram and TikTok or whatever, and they're watching, whatever the latest challenges of buckets of water. The problem with the plutocracy today, and the president's part of it because he has his crypto exchange. And I think they said at a news conference 2 days ago, they said, Mr. President, do you know that you're worth, $4 extra billion? And he's like, no. And they go, that's because of your crypto. So, and the other part, which I thought was interesting, Amazon paid Melinda, because, Amazon's got to suck up to the king now, $40 million to do a documentary about her life. And the comment that was made in the Wall Street Journal was, we're not really sure if that'll ever see its money back. So it's interesting. They get to pay each other off to keep each other in power. So everyone's frustrated, like you say, the Democrats, but the Democrats never came up with a strong, here's what we can do. The problem is Trump.
That's right.
I'm from New York and so is he. So that is good, bad, or indifferent. At least when we're from New York, we're very straight shooters. We tell you what we think. Trump told you exactly what he thought. He's been telling you what he thought since 1980. Nothing's changed in 50 years. And everyone's like, let's bring him in. Okay. And I heard a comment the other day from a world leader that said, oh, goody, I get to deal with a convicted felon. And I'm like, it's like, granted, our thing that says you have to be president is 35 or older. Listen, anyone can be president. Then if you're a felon, you can be president. That's fine. The problem is that all these guys do is just get richer, richer, richer for their circle. And so it's interesting how that's going to play out for the average person. Like today, they talked about the super AI thing that they announced for $500 billion. And really, that 500 billion isn't for small companies. It is for OpenAI and ChatGPT. And that's it. So it's like we're gonna do something for you, America, for Guy and Steve and this one and that one. But really, we say that, but we're gonna do it for these three people over here. And the problem is the public's not aware because the public doesn't have, as to your point about education or scholar, most people don't read. Most of the people didn't pay attention. And at a certain age, the crap that they taught in high school isn't the stuff that you and I learned when we went to school about history. They don't teach. So you had social sciences, you had, geography, you had history. They don't do that anymore. It's like, let's get them in and get them out. It's a factory to make stupid people. And that's a problem.
That's a good way of putting it, Stephen, because I think that one of the biggest causes of the political crisis is the education industry. Right. The education industry has been captured by a doctrine which is called human capital. And that was part of the neoliberal revolution, where human capital means that education has to be for economic gain. And you judge it by whether it increases your lifetime income or your access to success and individual prowess. That's not what education traditionally was meant to be. Education was about teaching morality, teaching the values of citizenship. That's how Thomas Jefferson, for example, put it, and goes all the way back to the ancients. Education was about the learning of morality, of empathy, of compassion. And that, of course, doesn't improve your human capital in their terminology, but it does increase your humanity. And what has happened, of course, and what you've just alluded to, is that our education system has been increasingly captured by private equity, by finance, extraordinarily, with more and more of our universities being run by and for plutocrats and plutocratic corporations that appear to be donors or research funders or whatever. And they turned many forms of upper education into mere schooling. So as you've just said, and it's not being atavistic in thinking, oh, everything was better in our day, blah, blah, blah. It is a genuine transformation that has taken place, which you can explain very easily because finance runs the show. And if finance runs the show, it's not going to be interested in emancipation of all of us, but it is going to be interested in making money and making profits and turning institutions into part of the economic system that exists. So we have a crisis of education. The figure I often give when I'm giving talks is that here you have the United States, which has a higher level of schooling than any society in history. More people have spent more years in schooling, and yet they are incredibly ignorant about civics, history, and so on. It's extraordinary that 49% of graduates say they never read a book unless they absolutely have to. That is a terrifying thought. And if I give you one stark statistic that should make all of us feel terrible is that over 20% of young graduates from a 4-year degree in university, over 20% do not believe the Holocaust ever took place.
Nice.
And a further 22% think it's been grossly exaggerated. Now, how do you have an education system which produces that sort of outcome? It's crazy. This should be something that we all know is true.
Right.
Okay. And here we have nearly half graduates thinking it didn't happen. This is crazy. So, but there are many other indicators, including things like ADHD, attention deficit, and all of the disorders that are the mental health problems of young people, including suicide, rapidly rising rates of suicide among teenage girls. These are all symptoms, morbid symptoms of a societal crisis. And it relates to how we have control of our time. And that's the theme underpinning the whole book.
But basically, I think a lot of that is social media or reality TV. They can't be like the Kardashians, let's say. And it's sort of like, I'm going to kill myself. Really? Or they get always fascinating when someone said they killed themselves because they got bullied on Facebook. Then get off Facebook. It's not a law. You have to be on Facebook. And I think that's part of the problem. And also
I agree with that, but there's a book that attributes most of what I've just been talking to the smartphone. Right. I think it started well before the smartphone. I think that it actually reflects that our societies in the last 50 years have become much more insecure. People are chronically insecure. It goes with debt. It goes with the fragility. It goes with the changing class structure that we talked about last time, the growth of the precariat, where people are facing chronic insecurity. And if people are insecure, they don't learn. They can't learn. They don't allocate their time in a rational way because they don't have control of their time. And they're facing shocks. They've lost immunity to shocks, and they've lost the resilience to be able to handle shocks and be able to recover it. And so they do listen to sirens of populism like Trump promising to bring back a mythical yesterday and playing on, nasty themes of masculinity and, men were real men and all that stuff, which is part of a very dangerous, fascistic form of thinking. And unfortunately, it plays on people's fears, particularly people in the precariat who don't have a lot of real education. And that is what I'm seeing, not just in your country, but in many other parts of the world. We're seeing it in Britain, we're seeing it across Europe, and we're seeing it in various developing countries. So it's a phenomenon to do with a system that is creating and intensifying insecurity and particularly uncertainty. That's why the subtitle of the book is The Age of Uncertainty. Uncertainty is something that is very distinctive in economics. It means that you cannot predict the probability of an adverse event, and you cannot predict the probability of being able to cope with it or recover from it. And chronic uncertainty causes mental stress and disorders of various types, and that's what we're seeing.
But it's almost like we're getting into fascism again, of the 30s. And with Elon, like I knew what, taps, dude, like we all know what you did. He also said he liked the pro-Nazi whatever of Germany. And then he's like, I didn't really mean it. You've been in the media for 20 plus years. You know what you're doing and saying. So enough of like Elon didn't know. Elon knew. So enough of that. So we're getting into fascism. And that's very interesting because it becomes history again. And because people don't know history or they haven't read a book, they don't understand. And in fact, like the book It Can't Happen Here that you told us about the very first time you were on, I read it and I was laughing the whole way through. I'm like, yeah, that's everything that's going on. So
That's
it
right.
was great. It was like, I know it's not a comedy, but I'm chuckling going, yep, no, that's right. Oh, look, he's getting assassinated. Yep, there we go. So we're getting to that point where it really is an Orwellian state, but not in a good way. And I don't think people get it because they don't know this stuff. I mean, when I grew up as a kid, I know we didn't have mass school shootings. I know teenage suicide wasn't where it is today. So somewhere in the 80s, I'm assuming, or in the 90s, we broke it. And I don't know if it's with deregulation or whatever, but at some point something broke where that all happened. The other point you brought up earlier about, if you will, rich people and keeping everyone down. I like to say, it's nice to have money. My concern isn't the top 5%. Okay. I'm not worried about me. What I'm worried about is the other 300 million people, let's say, or 250 million people in America that don't have money. It's like the old joke when we used to be worried about China. It's like when a billion people want to take a picnic, you can't stop them. So if one day 200 million people awake, and Americans are lazy and dumb, so probably never happen. You talk about now civil war, civil discourse. That's where you're going to go, unless you can make America a utopia where there's healthcare and there's this and there's that and all these wonderful things, and there's no hunger. At some point, someone's going to get fed up, and they're going to be like, enough. And that I don't think the wealthy get, because I think they've lost touch with that reality of we need to go back, not to a simpler time, but like where people, to your point, have leisure, go to school, and everyone's on this playing field, and the best of the best will rise, and the mediocre and the lower won't, and they can go do whatever. But if we don't do that in a 10-year period, you're going to have a greater disparity, and you're going to get people that are going to be like, I have nothing to lose, talking about, they can't relax and they can't this and they can't. Well, if you have nothing to lose, then what are you going to do? It's like, yeah, let's storm the Capitol, apparently, like we did 4 years ago, and we see how that went. But
well, I want to go beyond that, Stephen,
okay,
because the book is trying to say what we can do.
right.
And the final chapter, as you may know, if you read it, is a sort of allegorical peering into the near future, imagining that some sort of progressive alliance came through and took a range of actions which changed the nature of society to get us out of this catastrophe. Right. And I think that one of the key issues which the progressives in politics, either side of the Atlantic, have got to take up is a politics of time. Right. A politics of time which says, look, people have lost control of their time. If you're in the precariat, you have to do whatever you have to do to survive. Right. You cannot take proper leisure. You have to spend an enormous amount of time doing what I call work for labor, work that is unremunerated, but unless you do it, you get punished by the system. They have to spend a lot of time retraining, working to get benefits, or working to wait around. They have to spend a lot of time doing things that they don't want to do. And they can't spend much time doing the things that they would like to do. That is a crisis of our era. And this I think means that we need a politics of time. And that is why I strongly favor moving in the direction of having a basic income for everybody. And we can afford it. Of course we can afford it. We can afford it because we should be able to take part of the rents that are going to the plutocracy, right, and part of the rents that are being taken because we're allowing pollution and global warming to eat away at our commons, and put it into a capital fund. And as the capital fund builds up, pay out a gradually rising, right, basic income, common dividends, call it what you like. And that enables people to have more control of their time. We've now been involved in over 100 pilots and experiments with basic income. And one of the things that comes through again and again and again and again is a reduction in stress, a feeling that we have greater control of our time and we can spend it in the way we would wish to do as good family people, good community people, and so on. And actually increase work, proper work, and increase proper leisure. Getting control of your time. We need a slow time movement. A slow time movement is saying, listen, we don't need so many goods and consumer goods and things just rushing around. We can slow down. We can spend more time looking after our relatives, our communities, and our commoning. And then have a different way of looking at how we live. And that goes back to my rhetorical question at the outset. The most valuable form of work, according to the statistical offices in our country, is care, unpaid care. All right, but we have a care deficit. We have inadequate care that we're giving to our children, our elderly parents, our friends, our community. We don't have enough time. And it's not given any value. If it was given a proper value, which it can do, it's that the offices of statistics have given a value. They've worked out how much it's worth, and it's worth much more than manufacturing and all services except finance, worth more than all of them put together. And yet it's given a value of zero in our national measures of national income and growth. Now, that means that if I reduce the amount of time I give to caring for my elderly mother and go out and do a job sitting in an Amazon warehouse, I increase growth. But it's not an increase in happiness. It's not an increase in welfare. And we need to mock the notion of GDP growth. GDP was a concept that was devised by Simon Kuznets and Milton Friedman, but Simon Kuznets mainly, in the 1930s as a measure of resources mobilizable for war. And they reasoned that women looking after children were not mobilizable for war. So they were given a value of zero. Now, it was a stupid decision at the time, but it's been kept in the measures of GDP ever since. Now, come on, people, wake up. If a Martian was to come down and say and ask us, how do we measure national income? And we told him that, he would think we were mad. And we are. We need to gain control of our time and understand that the valuable uses of time are given a value of zero. This is crazy.
Well, let me ask you this on UBI. So I know you have to apply programs because we talked about the pilot programs before. So is it people that are 18 to death that get money? Or like in America, let's say I become president because everybody wants to elect me, I guess. I don't know. And I go, I'm going to do UBI. I'm going to bring Guy in as my head of UBI. And for those people, not UTI, but UBI. So universal basic income, here we go. So is it 18 above, 21 above? What's the minimum age? I know it goes until death. So, someone 65, let's say, is going to get Social Security and some other income. So at what age do we start? Or how does that work?
Well, my view, and I've developed this in a book called Basic Income, my view is that it's an economic right. It's an economic right based on the commons. The commons are what belong to all of us: the sea, the land, the air, the gifts of nature, if you like, and things that we've inherited as part of our commons. But some people are making a lot of profit from taking our commons, depleting our commons, and I believe they should be taxed for doing that, and that should be put into a capital fund that's invested in ecologically sustainable investments. And as the value of the fund goes up, the payment should go out. Now, the payment should go to every individual who's a resident, legal resident of the country. I never use the term universal basic income because that sets the hairs running, as it were, in the sense that people would say, well, that will lead to welfare tourism from people flooding into the country just so that they could get the basic income. And given the rhetoric that Trump and others are playing on demonizing migrants, which I think is disgusting, but that's the reality. I always say, look, if someone comes into the country legally, they would have to wait for a period before they become entitled to receive the basic income. A pragmatic decision in a long-term utopian world, everybody would receive it across the world. But in reality, in the next decade, is that you'd have to have some such rule. Now, I believe that every man and every woman should be paid individually, should not be paid on a family basis, because that leads to sexist exploitation and the man having a powerful position, blah, blah, blah. But you have to give it individually. And you have to give it a smaller amount to every child, so that it should be paid the mother or the surrogate mother, and that would be a fair way of doing it. Now, that's how we've designed pilots in a number of countries. And what it does is it leads to ideal situations like changing power structures and bargaining structures in families and communities. It reduces inequalities because it increases income generation in those communities with what we call a multiplier effect. And we see that for every dollar that's spent on a basic income, it generates another dollar in the economy as a result of spending and investing decisions by locals, but in a small scale way. The best outcome is that it results in improvements in mental health. And that's the first and most important thing we need today. We need a sense of control over our time, over our minds, where we can make decisions more rationally. I believe that people who are feeling basically secure make decisions based on altruism and empathy and compassion to a much greater extent than if they're fearful, insecure, and they can listen to the sirens of populism saying your situation is the fault of those people, those others, the migrants, the illegals. They demonize and they wolf whistle and so on. And it's racism pure and simple under the Trump whole regime. It is pure racism. That's what's so tragic in how many people who come from minority groups seem to have voted for him. I mean, they do not have education to the point where they should be able to see what he represents. I think it's an incredible indictment of the state of education in the United States that 45% of the women who voted for Trump. A misogynist, a convicted person who's for sexual assault, a man who openly boasted on a bus about how he grabbed women between the legs, just like that. I mean, how can a self-respecting woman vote for such a bastard? I'm sorry.
And here's, I think, part of it. One, and I say this tongue in cheek, but there's no men anymore. Like, we're a dying breed. And I'm not talking like John Wayne kicking in the door and having to shoot him up. I'm just talking, there's no men, there's no masculinity. Not that we drag you by the hair back to the cave thing, but there's just no men. There's no old school gentlemen anymore. And I think a lot of the women you spoke about are like, that's a man. Regardless of what he did, that's a man. And I think they want someone of authority, where Joe was very nice, but he looked like he was ready to go. And Camilla had it in the beginning and then lost it. And Trump, they're like, we like that. And they've seen Donnie now for 40 years on TV and in movies. So it's like that familiar face. And I think he gives that masculinity, whether it's right or wrong. I think that's part of the reason.
Well, let me come in there, Stephen.
Sure.
we must not get carried away in thinking that Trump is super popular. The turnout in the election was 64.5% of the electorate, okay?
Right.
And he got just over half. That means that fewer than 1/3 of the American electorate voted for Trump.
Right.
Less than 1/3, okay? And that means that a hell of a lot of people, including my daughter in Washington and my son, I mean, they hate what Trump stands for, what he says, how he says it, and so on. But they feel that disenfranchised because what the Democrats were offering was also thoroughly unattractive.
Right.
I mean, I think personally there's a lot of people curse Biden as Genocide Joe for supporting Netanyahu uncritically through the destruction of Gaza. I've been working with the Palestinians in this past year, and I cry every day seeing how many innocent people are needlessly being slaughtered. And he stood by when he could have done something. And a lot of people just didn't want to vote for him. Now, he would have been and Kamala Harris, ditto. She tried to distance herself, but they weren't offering a progressive politics either domestically or internationally. And that I think is the biggest tragedy, because he won by default, not won by super popularity. The fact that he got a majority of the vote does not mean he's super popular. And I think that must be borne in mind. What is lacking is a progressive alternative. I wouldn't put it in terms of masculinity. I would put it in terms of someone with a vision. He has his vision. I think it's a totally mad vision, but he has a vision, and I can see your point. But what we're lacking is a vision on the other side. And that's why I've tried to give it in this book and my other books, because what we need from progressive people is that vision. And I can tell you that, Stephen, I'm only an economist who writes books on these issues, but I receive thousands of emails from people saying, why don't our politicians get it? Why don't they offer this alternative vision of security and emancipation and destroying the rentier capitalism that's
there's nothing in it
love.
for them if they do it. There's nothing in
it.
For them.
But that's possible, but that's a little cynical if you think about it, because
I think it's realistic.
I know what you're saying. I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you, but it is cynical, and it's tragic, because if people are properly educated, they will vote for people who stand for morality and for decency and altruism. And I think that we have fantastic energy out there. I mean, I must tell you this. I believe that the young generations are incredibly energized, and quite right too, because they're seeing global warming and the destruction of the planet and the loss of the species. They're experiencing all of that, and the fires and the disasters that are mounting all the time. They're the primary victims. But there's a hell of a lot of energy, and it's not being mobilized. I think that will change. I really believe that we're going to see a counter movement, if you like, against what the plutocracy stands for. But we're in a dark tunnel, and we need to encourage that and energize people to develop that vision. And I was in Westminster last week talking to politicians on the left, MPs, and I was just saying to them, look, it's your chance. It's your chance now to articulate an alternative, because if those who articulate the good alternative, the good society, they're going to suddenly find there's a lot of support for them. And I feel that now when, in a sense, this is the ultimate defeat of the Democrats, the laborists, what I call the laborists in the book. It's the ultimate defeat because there's no coming back for the Bidenomics and the old style laborist agendas. There has to be a new emancipation, a new energy, a new ecological love of life, a slow time movement, a slow food movement, a slow education movement, a more and it's coming, but it's a painful point we're at the moment.
I hope, because if not, in 4 years,
Sure.
the king will still be here because there's no one going to run against him, and it'll be interesting to see how
And
that plays itself out.
JD Vance is waiting in the wings.
And listen, as long as you give him a couch, apparently he's very happy. But JD Vance is an interesting character because he called Trump Hitler. And then the minute Trump said, "Would you like to be my vice president?" He's like, "I love this guy. He's the best thing since sliced bread." And I'm like, "Well, you're not flipping much." To go from and I say this somewhat tongue in cheek. Like I've seen the movie and read the book. It's called Mein Kampf. It's and I joke with people about Mein Kampf that it's 800 pages long, and if you read it, the first 400 pages is a well written how we're going to do infrastructure, how we're going to do kind of like, we'll say what this is like, we're going to do A through half the alphabet. I'm like, that's kind of what Trump does. Then it's when you get to the middle of the alphabet to Z, which is like 451. And then like you turn the page, it goes, and then we're going to kill the Jews. And I'm like, okay, this is where I have a problem with your book. So if Hitler would have stopped at like 0 to 400, you have a great book. You could run a country with it. It's the latter part. And my concern is that I know we're doing the deportation of immigrants, and you can't now. They're trying to the 14th Amendment because if you didn't come here legally. Now, whether this is true or not, I don't know. I saw an article the other day that said Marco Rubio's parents did not come here legally. Our Secretary of State now. They said so theoretically, then Mr. Rubio, if it's true, can't be a U.S. citizen, which you can still be, I think, the Secretary of State, because look at all the guys we've had in the past, Vance and Zabriskie and all these other guys and Kissinger. So I'm just like, interesting. So, it's like they're picking and choosing what works for them. At some point, I think we need to it's going to be a level playing field. And I'm hoping, and I say this tongue in cheek, your utopia that you described comes, but I think there's going to be a lot of pain to get from here today to where we are. If you look at like who he's pardoning, what they're doing, it's becoming a society of, I don't want to say thugs, but it really is. It's not that society of America like when I was a kid that we grew up in. It's a much different society now. Like I pity the society and the population as a whole. I also pity the planet because they're going to have to deal with it. Some of the things Trump's saying and doing, I'm okay with it. Like you want to make economics deals with these countries, I'm good with that. Some of the stuff he says, I'm like, dude, you got it. You're putting us in a bad place. So hopefully in a few months you can come back and Michael will be here and you guys will talk about that. But I know you're not a fan. I'm not a fan. I'm on the fence to see where it takes us, but hopefully it takes us. I don't think we're going to get to where you want to be in your book at the ending chapter. Like, here's what we need to do under this administration. I think to your point, it's going to need a movement. It's going to need an evangelist that people go, oh my God, he's better than Trump. And right now the Democrats have nobody, and I mean nobody, that they can say he's better than Trump. And the Democrats, or whatever you want to call them in the future, are going to have to change their whole carny, if you will, their showmanship, what they do, what they can produce. And they're going to have to hold Trump to his feet to the fire. I mean, like, backpedaling on what he's doing.
I don't disagree with anything you've said, Stephen. I would merely reiterate that you only have a change of paradigm if there's a new paradigm that's taken shape outside the existing paradigm. It's the old Kuhnian thing, and some of your listeners will recognize the theory of the philosophy of science. And I think where we are today is that there's been a failure on the left, if you like, to articulate an alternative paradigm. I believe that if there was an alternative paradigm, it would soon become very popular. And I think that energy I was talking about a few minutes ago, what I was trying to do in that final chapter is to say, look, this is a paradigm that I imagine.
Right.
This is not utopia. It's a practical solution. It's not an utopia. It's very realizable. You start by saying a very simple thing. Let us recalibrate what we mean by economic growth.
Right.
Okay. If we said that doing community gardening, doing what we call allotments in Britain,
Right.
if that counted as economic activity, which it should, I mean,
Right.
it's producing fruit and vegetables for people that consume in their local communities, but at the moment it's given a value of 0.
Okay.
If we included that as part of what we call growth, then improving the access to community gardens would be something that we would want to do, and that is a healthy, ecologically sustainable activity. Similarly, if we gave a value to care, the caring for our elderly parents, the caring for our children, if we gave an imputed value, which is quite technically easy, and said that's included in our measure of economic growth, then suddenly we would reorient the debates on growth to more sustainable, more humane, more valuable forms of growth. I mean, Robert Kennedy, shortly before he was assassinated, he said that the GDP measures everything except what we value most in life. And he's right. He was right. And we've still got to change the way. Now, that's not, you don't require a revolution to do that.
Right.
You require your communities of sensible people to say, let's change the way we measure things.
Right.
Okay? Because there's no justification for saying the activities that Musk indulges in are somehow super productive, whereas there's something like, your fellow here, Michael, who's had to go off and look after his mother today, is given a value of 0. It's ridiculous. Okay,
I agree with that.
So I think that we start like that. The same with moving towards a basic income. We can afford it. We can afford it. And where we've seen it across the states now, over 50 cities are experimenting, and the results are beautiful. They're beautiful, and we need to have the courage to say we believe in this. We can move in that direction. Don't tell me we can't do it. John Maynard Keynes, the most famous of the 20th century economist, said, everything we really need, we can afford. And that's true today as it was in his time. So I think we've got to open our minds, and those who are opposed to Trump and what he stands for have got to do it damn quickly, because we are in a dark tunnel. But I think it will be coming soon. I really want to end on that sort of optimistic note, because I don't think we should throw up our hands and think the future is fascism again. That is just too awful to contemplate.
I agree with you. Well, Guy, as always, it's a pleasure. And for the people, I'm going to show you the book. There it is on YouTube, on the podcast. The book is called The Politics of Time, Gaining Control in an Age of Uncertainty. And yes, it's Guy Standing, and you can spell standing the normal way. I didn't know there's another way. And that's it. And we want to thank Penguin for sending us that so we can read it. Appreciate it. Guy, it is always good to see you, my friend. I look forward to seeing you in the next couple of months and see what you're up to. And there'll be a new book, but we'll look forward to seeing all of it. It's always a pleasure. And thank you for everybody watching. Don't forget to watch and subscribe and tell your friends. Guy, have a great day. Thank you. Cheers.
Same to you. Same to you.
Cheers. Good show.